This is actually devastating.
The MAHA movement is incensed over this executive order protecting the production of glyphosate.
It is not a conspiracy theory that glyphosate is linked to cancer. There are hundreds of studies. It increases risk significantly for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
You have to look at it and say, well, why is he doing that? I think what Trump is doing is he's saying, man, if we overnight almost stop providing this chemical, and we have an entire agricultural system currently that is dependent on this chemical, while we're trying to phase it out but not ready to, it could place a lot of burden on the system, where we may not be able to provide enough sustainable food product for our own people. And in that case, we would have to be accessing food from other countries throughout the world. And I think he's saying we want to be able to be in charge of our own food product, even though it may be tainted with glyphosate, as opposed to having to rely on other countries. There's a lot of uprising over it, you could say, a lot of upset people who are in the regenerative farming space and organic food space, and things were going really well until they feel like this executive order that President Trump signed.
You're Dr. Ron Dummar.
I am indeed.
This is the Be Well Now podcast. I'm Nick, the curious patient, the co-host. Listen, we cover a lot of RFK news around here, and
it's because I really like what he's doing.
You like what he's doing?
I like RFK Jr.
Well, you have a practice here in Heber City, Utah, where what kind of medicine would you say you practice? Like, what are the vibes around here? What do you believe in? Come on.
Yeah, so I practice, there's a buzz term going around called functional medicine. I want the body to be functioning. I'm looking at those functional parts, right? We're looking at functional physiology, anatomy. You could also say I practice a systems biology approach. I've used that term in the past as well, meaning ultimately that the body is a series of systems that are connected parts, and that by those systems interacting properly is the only way we can achieve vibrant health. And so when you have a system or a portion of the body that's down or not functioning properly, it affects the entire rest of the system. Just like the ecosystem of our world. If we start suppressing or overburdening a certain system, it's going to cause downstream other effects and other ills in the ecology that we experience.
Well, you're a big practitioner of Chinese medicine. I know you love plants because there's images of plants all throughout your practice. And genetically modified crops and plants, glyphosate, those cannot be good for the body. Obviously, there's lots of lawsuits tying them, to cancer.
Yes.
So, let's wrap up. Like, what happened in the news, and then why should we care about glyphosate?
Well, one of the things is, for instance, we've seen a lot of movement in the right direction. So a lot of these MAHA people, Make America Healthy Again, are super excited about RFK Jr.'s push towards a healthier food product, getting dyes, getting pesticides, getting herbicides out of our food. And then all of a sudden we see this executive order, right, sent off or written, signed by President Trump, that essentially secures access of the U.S. Government and agricultural system to these herbicides and pesticides. And people would ask, you have to look at it and say, well, why is he doing that? Well, I think personally he's doing it, and you can, if you go in and read the executive order as well, he's looking at it from a national security standpoint. Because if we transition, I think what he sees right now is that there's so many lawsuits happening against these corporations that are making, Roundup, glyphosate, these type of herbicides, that if they get overburdened by these lawsuits, it will be unsustainable, and they'll not have a viable business process anymore. So they'll basically have to stop providing the chemical. So I think what Trump is doing is he's saying, man, if we overnight almost stop providing this chemical, and we have an entire agricultural system currently that is dependent on this chemical, while we're trying to phase it out but not ready to, it could place a lot of burden on the system, where we may not be able to provide enough sustainable food product for our own people. And in that case, we would have to be accessing food from other countries throughout the world. And I think he's saying we want to be able to be in charge of our own food product, even though it may be tainted with glyphosate, as opposed to having to rely on other countries.
Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Monsanto's herbicide Roundup.
Yep.
First synthesized in 1950 by Swiss chemist Henri Martin.
Yes.
But the herbicide's adoption skyrocketed in the mid-90s with the introduction of Roundup Ready crops.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because, I mean, that basically sets the foundation for where we are today. We couldn't just make this entire system change, at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, so what actually has to happen is if you place glyphosate if you spray it on plants, the plants will die. That's what happens to them. It's a weed killer. We've used it originally even along the banks of streams and near trains where trains would go so that it wouldn't grow weeds over the tracks, so that we could, promote safety obviously there as well. But what they do in order to preserve the plant is they genetically modify. So they go in and change the genetics of the plant so that it can be accepting and not die from the glyphosate chemical addition. But the other thing that's interesting about the glyphosate is that it is almost like a chelation product. So it will pull onto it or latch onto it. Chelate is the word we use to describe that. But it will chelate minerals, so like calcium, magnesium, nitrogen. It will pull these things out of the ground. So the soil becomes very nutrient depleted. And the plant doesn't have access to it because it's all held up right there in the chemical glyphosate. So what we end up eating or consuming is we end up with this plant product that is actually very nutrient poor, nutrient depleted, but it has genetically been modified so that it can remain in a nutrient depleted state and still grow. And so then we have these plants come to maturation, and then we harvest them and we distribute them throughout our agricultural system. We consume them and they still have glyphosate residues. Well, you talked about how it skyrocketed. Well, of course, it was great because now farmers during this time in the 90s, they realized if they started using glyphosate, I would say it started in the 80s, really, 70s, 80s, and then just 90s it exploded for sure. But they realized that they didn't have to mechanically till the ground. So now you get rid of weeding. Well, what's a person, if I asked you, have you done much gardening, what's the thing you have to do all the time? You have to weed. You have to pull the weeds. You have to make sure, you have to till the ground and try to prevent those weeds from growing up. Well, now all you have to do is spray the field. You don't have to weed at all. You don't have to till the ground. And so farmers loved this, and it was an easy access thing that they could do, where now we have non-tilling farming. And that's what essentially developed as a result of our Roundup Ready crops, was this non-tilling farming and convenience ultimately.
And what happened after that? We had more soybeans and corn. They were glyphosate resistant.
So yeah, eventually people looked at that, farmers, and they said, hey, well, it's working over there with that plant. Let's see if we can get soybeans, or let's see if we can get corn. Let's see if we can get these other major crops Roundup Ready. And so essentially that was just a genetically modified process, or a genetic modification process that took place within the plant. And all they had to do was modify the gene of the plant so that it could accept it and actually live and grow in a nutrient depleted state.
And you talk about like a pesticide treadmill where farmers have to use stronger chemicals. It's worsened soil degradation and biodiversity loss. I have to imagine we want to get away from this, right? And so
we're trying to
Make
phase
America
it out.
Healthy Again movement's like, why are we protecting glyphosate? I mean, look at all these
Exactly
negative
what they're
effects.
saying. Yeah.
So how do you make sense of it all?
So one of the things that, and this is where I think people are confused as well, is they see Donald Trump did this, he preserved it, or did an executive order that said, okay, we need to maintain access to this somehow, right? It needs to be ready and usable for us as we transition to regenerative farming. But another positive note too is that HHS with RFK Jr. has essentially said, we're going to ban one of the major uses that we see within of glyphosate within the agricultural system, and that is as a desiccant. So a desiccant is like kind of drying the product up. So what they'll do is not only spray it on the plant as it's growing to prevent weeds, but then they use it in another spot and they'll spray it to kind of dry the substance out before they ship it. So they're spraying it on their seed, they're spraying it on your corn, they literally spray it before they ship it out as well. So it's not just on the plant as it's growing, but they'll literally use it as a desiccant to dry it. So it's not, because if you have moisture, if you ship it with moisture in it, then it'll grow mold, right? And it'll start to deteriorate. So if they can dry it out, what they found is what this substance will do, this chemical, because it's a chelator, it'll pull nutrients, it'll pull things out. It actually pulls away that moisture too, so it wicks it away. It's a desiccant. So MAHA, through RFK Jr., is actually saying, hey, we're working towards banning this practice, which you could imagine if you have your food being sprayed literally with glyphosate before it's sent out. That is a compounding effort of saying, hey, we're adding more and more glyphosate so that now we have a higher chance of tumors, cancers, and even autoimmune disorders and things like that as a result of the glyphosate.
Some people don't think much about endocrine disrupting, and some people do. So for the folks who care about this, how does glyphosate disrupt our hormones?
Well, endocrine system is hormone based. We're talking about the thyroid, we're talking about the pituitary, we're talking about the hypothalamus. We're talking about these organs that manage and regulate hormones in the body. Okay, so everyone knows, I believe, estrogen and testosterone. We hear a lot about that now, and having estrogen or taking estrogen or having testosterone and having enough testosterone and taking testosterone, whether or not that's good for us or not. So what we see actually from glyphosate is some aromatase inhibition. And so for a female, this could be actually problematic because it actually increases testosterone production. Okay. And what we see in conditions like infertility, PCOS, even with breast cancer, is we can see elevated estrogens or elevated testosterones. They develop like an estrogen dominant situation. And what the glyphosate does is it actually will mimic some of your hormones. So it'll be like a hormone mimicker. So it can step in to the receptor spot for the hormone, so that you now are left with all this estrogen that you've been producing. You have glyphosate, which now is mimicking your estrogen as well. It fills the spot instead of your estrogen. And so now you have estrogen dominating. You're increasing the amount of estrogen overall in your system, and you end up with estrogen dominant breast cancer. So this is one of the reasons that these companies are being sued or have lots of lawsuits against them for these cancers and tumors.
So what does the solution look like? A world without glyphosate? Is that possible?
So 100% is possible, because we're literally talking about a product that didn't really start making moves in the market until 1980, 1990 is when it really surged. So we haven't been dependent on glyphosate for long. So we can definitely provide food product for our people without glyphosate. So the question of whether or not we're able to do it, that's not a question. But the real question is how dependent we have become on it. And I think that's where this news about Trump signing an executive order comes into bear, because now you say, how dependent are we on this? And I think Trump's looking at that saying as well, him obviously not being an agricultural man, right? But he says it like, look, we went from like 27, I think, million pounds of use in the early 90s. And now we're up to, I think it's like 275 million pounds a year of use. Okay.
Wow. So
are we dependent on it? Well, I mean, that's a lot of use. And one of the reasons we're using it, and you mentioned this treadmill effect, right? Well, one of the reasons we're using it is because at such higher rates, when we initially were using it, the weeds were completely gotten rid of, and like, oh, this stuff's great. But then eventually plants learn. They're smart. Plants are intelligent. And so they learn to adapt. So we develop these super weeds, just like we have super bugs that are developing in other places. So we have these super weeds that develop, and they go, wow, how do we get rid of this weed? Somehow this weed is getting through. So then they have to start adapting, or they use more glyphosate, more glyphosate, more glyphosate. And then on top of that, the extra amount of glyphosate maybe isn't working because the super weeds are still getting through. So then they have to try to adapt and use a combination or a cocktail of different chemicals just to keep all of the super weeds at bay. So now imagine we're not just talking about glyphosate, but we're also talking about a pesticide or herbicide known as dicamba, right? Or 2,4-D. All of these things oftentimes are used in combination or in cocktail to try to get us to the spot we need to be to sustain this process of farming. And so it's like, why are we so dependent? But we are. We're so dependent, and we're using millions and millions, hundreds of millions of tons of this product. So that is an important thing for as we transition to say, okay, how do we, as we transition, it's very likely going to work. I believe it will work. I believe we transition the body of the world, right? The soil will begin to be we'll have bacteria and the fauna and the flora, and everything will just come right back if we just give it a chance and stop hitting it with so many chemicals. If you think about it, here's an interesting example. A lot of people have heard about antibiotic use. And if you use antibiotics too frequently, you can actually develop antibiotic resistance. That's the same thing as glyphosate resistance. And at some point, you develop super bugs or you develop super weeds, right? And so we develop these things in our bodies too if we overutilize antibiotics, which is right. We're just trying to kill, just eliminate the probiotics, the bacteria. But the body has a mechanism of surviving. It wants to live. It wants to thrive. It wants to survive. And it will adapt and figure out a way to work around whatever chemical onslaught is thrown its way. And so right now, these super weeds is what we're seeing happen. We're trying to figure out a way to work it around. But all we have to do is pull away from these chemicals and begin introducing and nourishing the soil properly. And encouraging farmers to use sustainable regenerative techniques, and we'll see yields come back.
Just to touch a little bit on how it's gotten worse, though, mounting evidence of harm.
Yes.
Regulatory agencies, though, have repeatedly raised allowable glyphosate limits in food.
Yeah.
So it's like,
so even though we know it's harmful.
Even though the WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen in 2015,
yep.
EPA and then another regulatory agency dismissing the findings under the industry pressure. So we're continuing to allow it. So it sort of feels like, we might go in the right direction eventually, and you say we can, but it just feels like more glyphosate. I mean, is that a reason to want to not to want to eat organic? Give me some news I can use here. How can I maintain control, or like, where's my agency as an individual or as a family member, providing food for my family, despite the broad picture here? Yeah,
stepping into what's happening at my house on my table is we need to be going with as nutrient dense, sustainable, if you can grow food in your own, in and around your own home, right, then do it, right? If you can have fruit trees, if you can have a little garden or garden boxes, and you can develop or grow produce that you can use, even if it's at a small amount, right? And growing them without chemicals is the idea, right? Don't use sprays and Roundup and chemicals on your plants. So if you can do that for yourself, that's number one, right? You can get it from your own soil, from quality ground, nutrients out of the environment in which you live. It's going to be more sustainable for you and provide more vibrant health. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you're not able to do that, or if you need to supplement that because you don't have 2 acres of a garden, which is, you'd have to have a lot of garden even to support a decent sized family, even 3 kids. You still have to have a pretty good sized garden, right? Because you would go through a lot of food. So most of us live in communities and we have maybe a quarter of an acre, right? Or an acre if you're really lucky, right? So you don't really have a lot of access to that. So you'd have to look at the grocery store, at produce, and you'd have to select for more organic foods. And that's really what you're looking for, is focus on produce, step away from packaged foods, because more often than not, you're packaged and you're canned and things like that are going to have glyphosate and storage and preservatives and colorings and dyes and everything on it anyway. So focus on your produce, try to get it as organic and natural as possible. And that's the best thing that we can do right now, right? And by us choosing and selecting that way as well, we can change the market. We can encourage these farmers and these agricultural producers to improve their techniques. There is a very sustainable effort going on right now, a significant effort in the regenerative farming space. And they're showing I actually don't have the name right at the tip of my tongue, but I know that there is a organization that is showing them that you can actually turn your farm around to make money. Like, you can actually make money with regenerative farming. And this has been one of the things, is they felt like the chemicals were so useful and viable, and that it helped the farmers sustain crop yields and make money. And so what they're saying ultimately is you can still have a viable farm by doing regenerative, healthy farming. So we need to encourage farmers as much as possible to step away from the chemicals, to step away from the shortcuts, the easy steps in life that are actually chemically filling our bodies with tumors and superbugs and things like that. And to be more supportive and to integrate more of this regenerative farming concept into their farming practice.
So how can I detox at home if I'm worried about exposure to glyphosate?
So treating it is another thing. We see this frequently in our office as well. Exposure to glyphosate, hormone disruption, endocrine disruption in the body. And then looking for, in certain people, potential heavy metal disruption, hormone imbalance. Sometimes people are just depleted in minerals. And they're like, wow, I'm eating all these foods that you're saying should have these minerals in it. But if we're not getting our foods from sustainable sources, then those foods very likely have been chemically sustained and did not have the opportunity to pull up those nutrients from the ground, because they literally were chelated out of them by the chemical that was used to prevent the weeds, right? So then we have to start introducing, either via supplementation or adapting their diet, to say, you know what, you need to start looking for more organic food sources, or growing your own, or even using, mineral supplementation. But to get the chemical out of your body so that it's not standing in the place of disrupting your hormones, plugging into those receptors and taking its place and then causing a disruption in the hormone balance. One thing that you will want to look at is maybe binders, clay. You can get charcoal, pectin, apple pectin. There's a variety of binders that we call them binders, but they also are like chelators themselves, where they'll literally chelate the metal or the chemical itself. So they'll help to draw that glyphosate out of the body and to eliminate that. Also, things like we've talked about NAC or glutathione to support detoxification pathways within the liver. Chlorophyll. There's a lot of things, and not every single thing is right for every person, and that's why we like to do our individual focused approach, to where we have optimal wellness plans put together for specific people based on their conditions.
So if someone out there is listening and they're like, I want to get my labs done, they can get them done through community health and wellness. What if they got them done somewhere else? Could they could they send them to you and then schedule a consult where you could analyze them?
Yeah, for sure.
And that could be done anywhere?
Yeah, and they can also say, hey, what labs should I get? Okay. Right? And we'll send people with a list of labs that we want so that they can take it to a provider or they can take it somewhere and say, hey, can I get all these? What we found, honestly, is that most providers do not order anywhere close to the level of detail that we do in our labs. So even when we do send people out, oftentimes what we'll get back is they're like, well, I don't know about this, or they send it into the lab and it's just not what they're used to. And so they end up giving us or bringing us the results that are really only partial. And so what we find is really if you go through our process, it really works. Obviously, it works more seamless and it's the best. But absolutely, if you are anywhere in the country and you go to a LabCorp, a draw facility or something like that, you can get basically the exact same results as if you were here in Heber.
Is that a good place to stop, to reach out to Community Health and Wellness and send your office a text message if they're interested?
Absolutely. I think that we're good there, right?
What's the phone number they can text?
All right. So you can reach out to us, thank you, Nick, at 435-657-3696, or you can reach us at our website at chwheber.com.
What else would you like to hear about or see if you're watching us on YouTube on the Be Well Now podcast? Let us know. Please subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform. We appreciate you as always. And as always, be well now.
Be well now. Namaste.
Namaste.